At my graduation dinner, my sister smashed the cake into my face, laughing as I fell backward with blood mixing into the frosting. Everyone said it was just a joke. But the next morning at the ER, the doctor stared at my X-ray and immediately called 911 because what he saw revealed shocking truth. Hi, my name is Lauren Mitchell, and for a long time, I believed that surviving quietly was a kind of strength. On the night of my graduation dinner in Madison, Wisconsin, I told myself the same thing. The restaurant sat just a few blocks from the university campus, all warm lighting and polished wood, the kind of upscale casual place families choose when they want to look proud without trying too hard. There were nearly 30 people squeezed into the long table they'd pushed together just for us relatives I hadn't seen in years, a couple of professors who had watched me juggle night classes and 2 jobs, family friends who kept congratulating my parents as if they were the ones who'd earned the degree. I was 34 years old, holding a master's diploma that had taken me almost a decade longer than planned, and I remember thinking, at least tonight, I get to exist without apologizing. I should have known better. The cake arrived just after dessert plates were cleared, tall and ridiculous, 3 layers of buttercream with gold lettering that read, "Congratulations, Lauren." Someone clapped. My mother dabbed her eyes dramatically. My father lifted his glass for a toast that somehow turned into a story about sacrifice, mostly his. And then there was Brooke, my older sister by 19 months, standing beside me with her arm looped through mine as if we were inseparable. Brooke had always known how to perform affection in public. She laughed louder than everyone else, hugged tighter, smiled wider, the kind of woman people called magnetic, without realizing how sharp magnets could be when they snapped together. When she leaned in close, I smelled champagne on her breath and heard her whisper, "Relax. Smile. It's your night." The flash came first. Someone's phone camera, maybe several. And then, without warning, Brooke's hands were on the back of my head, shoving my face forward into the cake. Not gently, not playfully. The impact was sudden and brutal, frosting exploding against my nose and mouth, my teeth slamming into something solid beneath the soft sweetness. There was a crack, dull, sickening, and the world lurched sideways. I remember the taste of sugar and iron mixing together, the sting of pain blooming too fast to understand. And Brooke's laughter slicing through the room, bright and sharp and deliberate. The chair behind me tipped as I fell backward, my skull connecting with the edge of it before the floor caught me completely. For a moment, everything went white. Then blue. Then nothing but noise. People gasped. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else said, "Oh my God," in a way that sounded more entertained than concerned. I tried to sit up, but my head felt wrong, heavy and hollow, like it wasn't fully attached anymore. Frosting slid down my cheek, warm and sticky, and when I wiped at it, my fingers came away red, blood. I stared at it, confused, as if it belonged to someone else. Brooke crouched beside me, still smiling, still laughing, one hand fluttering uselessly near my shoulder. "Oh, come on," she said, loud enough for the table to hear. "It was just a joke." That phrase moved faster than help ever did. It was just a joke. Someone repeated it like reassurance. My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Lauren, don't be dramatic," she said, her voice already edged with irritation. "You're fine." A cousin cracked another awkward laugh. My father frowned, not at Brooke, but at me. "Don't ruin the night," he muttered under his breath as if my blood on the floor was a personal inconvenience. I tasted cake and salt and something coppery at the back of my throat as my ears rang, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the rest of the room. I wanted to ask for ice. Or water. Or help. Instead, I found myself apologizing. "I'm okay," I said, though the words felt like they were coming from underwater. I pushed myself upright, ignoring the way the room tilted and swayed. Someone handed me a napkin, then another, pressing them into my hands as if that solved everything. Brooke stood, brushing frosting off her dress, already telling the story for laughs. "You should have seen her face," she said, grinning. Classic. Phones were still raised. Someone suggested a group photo. I remember thinking, why is everyone still standing? Why is no one telling her to stop? My head throbbed in time with my heartbeat, pain spreading down the base of my skull, but every instinct I'd learned over 34 years kicked in. Stay calm. Don't overreact, don't embarrass the family. This is who Brooke is. This is how she jokes. I smiled, because that's what I was supposed to do. I laughed weakly, because silence would have felt like an accusation. When a server asked if I needed anything, my mother answered for me. "She's fine," she said sharply. "Just clumsy." I didn't remember leaving the restaurant so much as I remembered sitting in my car afterward, hands shaking on the steering wheel, the interior lights too bright, my reflection smeared with mascara and dried frosting. The laughter from inside still echoed faintly through the windows, Brooke's laughter most of all. I pressed my forehead against the cool leather and closed my eyes, waiting for the dizziness to pass. It didn't. Instead, a dull pressure settled behind my right ear, deep and insistent, like a warning I didn't yet have language for. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Madison, past campus buildings that had once felt like escape, I replayed the moment again and again, searching for a version where it really had been harmless. Maybe she hadn't meant to push that hard. Maybe I lost my balance. Maybe I was tired, stressed, oversensitive. Those explanations came easily. They always had. What didn't come easily was the image that kept intruding no matter how hard I tried to push it away the brief second after I hit the floor. Before Brooke pretended to panic, when I'd seen something flash across her face that wasn't concern or surprise, but satisfaction. By the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot, my head was pounding, my vision swimming, nausea rising in slow, ugly waves. I told myself I just needed sleep. Ice. Quiet. I told myself what everyone else had already decided for me. It was just a joke. And yet, as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling while pain radiated through my skull, one thought kept breaking through the noise, soft but relentless, refusing to be ignored. If this was a joke, I wondered, why does it feel like no one cared whether I lived through it? I made it home without incident, though I barely remembered the drive. Inside my apartment, the quiet was almost painful. I dropped my keys on the counter and leaned against it, waiting for the room to stop spinning. When I went to the bathroom and turned on the light, my reflection startled me. Frosting clung stubbornly to my hairline and the collar of my dress, already stiffening as it dried. Beneath it, a purpling bruise bloomed along my cheekbone, darker than I expected. There was dried blood near my ear. I stared at it for a long time, tracing it with my eyes instead of my fingers, afraid of what I might feel if I touched it. "You're fine," I whispered aloud, testing the words. They sounded thin, unconvincing. I cleaned myself up slowly, methodically, the way I did everything that scared me. Cold water on my face. A damp cloth pressed gently against my head. I changed into pajamas and crawled into bed, leaving the lights off even though the darkness made my thoughts louder. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the moment again, Brooke's hands on my head, the sudden force, the crack of impact. I replayed it from different angles, searching for a version that made sense, a version where it wasn't deliberate. Maybe she'd had too much to drink. Maybe she misjudged the distance. Maybe I'd leaned forward at the wrong moment. Those explanations lined up neatly with what everyone else had already decided, and there was comfort in that, a strange relief in not having to question the story I'd been given my entire life. Sleep came in fragments. I drifted in and out, jolting awake whenever I moved my head too quickly, nausea flaring without warning. At some point, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I squinted at the screen, my vision blurring as I focused. A notification from Brooke. She'd tagged me in her video. "Cake fail, congrats, sis." The clip was already racking up likes and comments, strangers laughing at a moment that felt anything but funny from the inside. I set the phone face down and turned onto my side, careful not to put pressure on the wrong spot. My head was pounding now, a deep, insistent ache that refused to fade. By the time I finally forced myself out of bed the next morning, it wasn't just pain keeping me slow and careful, it was memory. Something about the way my body reacted, the way fear had slipped in so quietly, unlocked a familiar pattern I had spent years pretending didn't exist. I moved through my apartment like someone walking through fog, every sensation slightly delayed, every thought pulling something old behind it. As I brewed coffee I couldn't drink and sat at the small kitchen table waiting for the nausea to pass, fragments of my childhood surfaced without warning, not as clear scenes at first, but as feelings I recognized instantly: the unease, the pressure to stay pleasant, the instinct to minimize whatever hurt me before anyone else had the chance to do it for me. Growing up, my family liked to say Brooke and I were close. The girls, my mother would call us, as if proximity automatically meant safety. Brooke was born 19 months after me, close enough that people assumed we'd grow up as equals, but from the beginning, there was an invisible line drawn between us that everyone pretended not to see. Brooke was spirited, emotional, sensitive. She needed attention, my mother said, and so she got it. I, on the other hand, was strong. That word followed me everywhere, clung to me like a label I never asked for. Lauren can handle it. Lauren doesn't need fussing. Lauren understands. What no one ever said out loud was that my strength made it easier to look away when I was hurt. One of my earliest memories is from a summer afternoon at the community pool, the kind with chipped blue tiles and a lifeguard chair that always looked slightly crooked. I must have been 7 or 8. Brooke and I were racing along the edge, daring each other to jump in without holding our noses. I remember laughing, the sun burning my shoulders, the concrete hot beneath my bare feet. And then I remember the sudden shove from behind, unexpected and forceful, my body pitching forward before my mind caught up. I hit the water hard, the impact knocking the breath from my lungs, panic flaring as I flailed under the surface. When I finally surfaced, choking and crying, Brooke was already screaming for help, her face twisted in exaggerated concern. She slipped. She told the lifeguard. She slipped and fell in. My mother wrapped a towel around me, annoyed more than worried. "Lauren, you scared everyone," she said. "You have to be more careful, later." When I tried to explain that Brooke had pushed me, my mother sighed and shook her head. "Your sister didn't mean it," she said firmly. "You know how clumsy she can be." That was the first time I learned how easily the truth could be reshaped if it inconvenienced the wrong person. There were other moments like that, scattered through my childhood like loose threads no one bothered to tie off. The time I fell down the basement stairs during a holiday gathering, my back bruised so badly it hurt to sit for days. Brooke had been behind me then too, her hands suddenly on my shoulders, her weight pressing forward just as I reached the top step. I remembered the jolt, the tumble, the way the ceiling spun. Brooke cried harder than anyone afterward, hovering over me, fetching ice packs, telling everyone how awful she felt. "I was just trying to help her carry the boxes," she kept saying. I didn't realize she was going to lose her balance. My mother believed her without hesitation. When I lay awake that night, sore and aching, listening to Brooke move around my room, to make sure I was okay, I told myself the same thing everyone else had. Accidents happen. Families are messy, don't make trouble. Even when we were teenagers, when bruises and scrapes started to draw more questions, the story never changed. Brooke was popular, charismatic, the kind of girl teachers adored and boys followed without effort. I was quieter, more inward, focused on getting out college, scholarships, anything that meant independence. When I came home one afternoon with a swollen wrist after Brooke and I had argued, and she'd slammed the door into my arm, my mother barely looked up from the stove. "What did you do to provoke her?" she asked. I stared at her, stunned, the pain radiating through my hand. "I didn't do anything," I said softly. She sighed. "Well, you know how Brooke is. You have to stop pushing her buttons." The implication was always the same. If I was hurt, I must have caused it. What made it harder to question was the way Brooke always stepped into the role of caretaker afterward. She brought me ice. She insisted on helping me walk. She apologized, just enough to sound sincere without ever admitting fault. "I worry about you," she'd say, her voice low and intimate, meant just for me. "You're so fragile sometimes." And somehow, over time, that word replaced strong. Fragile. Unreliable. Accident-prone. It was easier to believe her than to confront the possibility that the person everyone loved might be intentionally hurting me. So, I learned to stay quiet. I learned to swallow discomfort before it reached my mouth. I learned that peace in our family depended on my willingness to absorb damage without complaint. By the time I left for college, I had perfected the art of self-erasure. I paid my own way as much as I could, worked part-time jobs, stayed busy enough that I didn't have to go home often. Brooke stayed close to my parents, her presence filling every space I left behind. Whenever I did come back, the dynamic snapped into place like muscle memory. Brooke joked at my expense. I laughed it off. If something broke or went wrong, it was somehow my fault. "You're always in the wrong place at the wrong time," my mother liked to say, as if fate itself had it out for me. I didn't argue anymore. Arguing required energy I'd learned to conserve. Sitting at my kitchen table that morning, head pounding, coffee untouched, I saw those moments differently for the first time. They lined up too neatly, each incident echoing the last, each followed by the same dismissal, the same forced forgiveness. It wasn't that I hadn't remembered them before, it was that I'd never allowed myself to connect them. Doing so would have meant questioning not just Brooke, but my entire understanding of family, of safety, of love. It would have meant admitting that the silence I'd mistaken for strength was something else entirely: conditioning. Survival. I pressed my fingers lightly against my temple and winced as pain flared again, sharper now, less willing to be ignored. The memory of Brooke's hands on my head the night before slid seamlessly into the memory of her hands on my shoulders on the stairs, at the pool, in the hallway of our childhood home. Different ages. Same pressure. Same suddenness. Same aftermath. My mother's voice echoed in my head, as clear as if she were standing in my kitchen. "Your sister didn't mean it." I had built my entire life around that sentence, bending myself into shapes that made it easier to believe. What scared me most wasn't the realization itself, but how familiar it felt, how natural it had been to doubt my own experience, even as my body protested. I had been trained, slowly and thoroughly, to distrust my instincts, to question my pain before anyone else had the chance, to smooth things over, keep the peace, stay quiet. As I sat there, breathing through the nausea and the ache, one truth settled heavy and undeniable in my chest. The reason I had apologized the night before, the reason I had smiled through blood and frosting, the reason I had driven home alone telling myself I was fine, had nothing to do with weakness. It had everything to do with practice. I had learned, from a very young age, that in my family, silence was safer than honesty. And for the first time, as the pain refused to fade and the memories refused to stay buried, I began to wonder what it had cost me to believe that for so long. By late morning, the argument inside my head had grown louder than the pain itself. I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hand, staring at the screen as if it might make the decision for me. The nausea hadn't faded. If anything, it had sharpened, rolling through me in waves that left me sweating and unsteady. Every time I moved my head, a sharp flash of pain radiated behind my right ear, followed by a dull pressure that made it hard to think. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself I'd been through worse. And then I stood up too quickly, and the room tilted so violently that I had to grab the dresser to keep from collapsing. That was the moment something shifted. Not emotionally. Physically. My body stopped asking for permission. The drive to UW Health Hospital felt unreal, like I was watching myself from a distance. Traffic noise grated against my skull, every honk and engine rev slicing through me with surgical precision. I kept the radio off and the windows cracked despite the chill, hoping fresh air might settle my stomach. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from panic, but from the effort it took to stay focused. At every red light, I considered turning around. I imagined my mother's reaction if she found out. "You're wasting their time." I imagined Brooke's laugh. "You're so dramatic." Those voices were familiar enough to almost turn me back. Almost. Inside the ER, the brightness hit me like a blow. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. And I instinctively squinted, a sharp spike of pain shooting through my head. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee. People sat hunched in chairs, clutching arms, holding ice packs, staring into space. I approached the intake desk slowly, each step deliberate, afraid that if I rushed, I'd lose control of my balance. When the nurse asked what brought me in, the words caught in my throat. "I hit my head," I said finally, keeping my voice low. Last night. I didn't say how. Not yet. Saying it out loud felt dangerous, like crossing a line I wasn't ready to acknowledge. They gave me a wristband and told me to wait. I sat rigidly in the chair, hands folded in my lap, eyes fixed on the floor. The lights pulsed at the edges of my vision. Every so often, a wave of nausea rose without warning, forcing me to close my eyes and breathe through it. I worried about what I looked like. I worried they'd think I was exaggerating. I worried they'd send me home with ibuprofen and a lecture about stress. When my name was finally called, relief washed through me so abruptly it made my knees weak. The exam room was small and cold, the paper on the bed crinkling loudly as I sat down. A nurse asked me the standard questions: any allergies, any medications, when exactly the injury occurred. Each answer felt heavier than the last, especially when she asked if I'd lost consciousness. I don't know, I admitted. Everything went white for a second. She nodded, her expression neutral but attentive, and dimmed the lights slightly when I winced. That small gesture almost undid me. No one had done that for me before. Adjusted the environment instead of asking me to endure it. When Dr. Andrew Cole entered, he did so quietly, his presence calm and unhurried. He introduced himself, pulled up a stool, and looked at me directly as he asked me to describe what I was feeling. I told him about the headache, the nausea, the dizziness, the sensitivity to light. I avoided the details I wasn't ready to name. He listened without interrupting, his attention steady, grounded. "I'm going to do a quick neurological exam," he said gently. "Just follow my instructions." He checked my pupils, asked me to track his finger with my eyes, to smile, to squeeze his hands. Each task required more effort than it should have. When he asked me to stand, I swayed slightly, and his hand shot out instinctively to steady me. "That's enough," he said, guiding me back to the bed. His tone had changed, not alarmed, but serious. "I'd like to get some imaging done. A CT scan and X-rays. Just to be safe." The word safe landed strangely in my chest. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had used it in reference to me. I nodded, suddenly afraid in a way I hadn't been the night before. This wasn't embarrassment or hurt feelings. This was my body insisting something was wrong, and an expert agreeing to listen. The imaging room was colder still, the machinery looming and impersonal. As I lay on the narrow table, staring up at the ceiling tiles, I focused on staying still, on breathing evenly. My thoughts drifted despite my efforts, replaying the shove, the fall, the laughter. For years, I had been taught to override discomfort, to ignore warning signs in favor of keeping things smooth. Lying there, encased in humming equipment, I realized how deeply that instinct had been ingrained. Even now, a part of me hoped the scans would show nothing, just so I wouldn't have to confront what that might mean. When the tests were finished, I was wheeled back to the exam room to wait. Time stretched thin, each minute dragging as the pain pulsed steadily behind my eyes. I tried to distract myself by counting my breaths, by focusing on the steady beep of a monitor down the hall. Fear crept in quietly, settling somewhere beneath my ribs. This wasn't fear of judgment anymore. It was fear of consequences. Of answers I might not be able to ignore once they were spoken aloud. Dr. Cole returned with a tablet in his hand, and a look on his face I couldn't quite read. He pulled the curtain closed and sat down again. Closer this time. "Lauren," he said, and the way he used my name made my stomach drop. "I want you to listen to me carefully." My pulse thudded in my ears. "The scans show a hairline fracture at the base of your skull." The room seemed to narrow, the words echoing strangely as they sank in. "A fracture. It's not life-threatening," he continued, holding up a hand when my breath caught. "But it is serious. And it explains your symptoms." I stared at him, numb. Part of me wanted to laugh. Another part wanted to cry. "From last night?" I asked weakly. He hesitated, just long enough for dread to bloom. "Not entirely," he said carefully. He turned the tablet toward me, pointing to another image. "There's evidence of an older injury here, healing bone. This didn't happen yesterday." My mind scrambled, images colliding, stairs, pool, doors slamming shut. "Doctor." Cole's voice remained steady as he spoke again. "Given what I'm seeing, I'm required to make a call. Distraction, and where lies? A call? My voice sounded far away. He nodded. Yes. To ensure your safety. In that moment, fear surged fully into focus, sharp and undeniable. This wasn't about feelings anymore. It wasn't about family dynamics or misunderstandings. It was about survival. As he reached for the phone mounted on the wall, a single, terrifying thought cut through everything else. For the first time in my life, someone wasn't asking me to endure. They were taking my pain seriously. And whatever came next, there was no going back to pretending it was nothing. The room felt smaller after Dr. Cole spoke, as if the walls had edged closer while I wasn't looking. I stared at the tablet in his hands, the grayscale image of my own skull glowing faintly under the harsh exam room lights, and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked unreal, abstract shadows and lines that could have belonged to anyone. A fracture, I repeated. More to myself than to him. The word didn't carry weight yet. It hovered, waiting. Dr. Cole nodded, his expression careful, deliberate. A hairline fracture, he said again, pointing to the thin, jagged line near the base. That's what's causing the headache, the dizziness, the nausea. Your symptoms make sense. He swiped to the next image, his finger tracing a different area with quiet precision. And this, he continued, his voice lowering slightly, is something else. I leaned forward despite the pain, squinting as my eyes tried to focus. There was another line there, fainter but unmistakable, surrounded by a subtle halo I wouldn't have noticed if he hadn't drawn my attention to it. That's a partially healed fracture, he said. Based on the bone remodeling, it's not recent. I'd estimate it occurred somewhere between 2 and 4 years ago. The words hit harder than the diagnosis itself. 2 to 4 years. My stomach dropped, a hollow sensation spreading through my chest. Images flashed uninvited, the fall down the stairs during the holidays, the door slamming into my arm, the countless times I'd been told I was clumsy, careless, unlucky. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, my thoughts colliding too quickly to form anything coherent. Dr. Cole didn't rush me. He waited, giving the silence room to settle. When he spoke again, it was with a clarity that left no space for the stories I'd told myself for years. Lauren, he said gently, this didn't start last night. Something inside me cracked, not in the sharp, splintering way I'd come to associate with pain, but in a slow, spreading realization that reconfigured everything I thought I knew. The room seemed to tilt, not from dizziness this time, but from perspective. I wasn't weak. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't dramatic or fragile or oversensitive. The evidence was there, etched into my own bones, visible to anyone trained to look. My breath hitched, and I pressed my hand to my chest as if to anchor myself. For a moment, relief surged alongside fear, a strange, almost dizzying combination. Relief, because I hadn't been wrong. Fear, because being right meant something terrible had been happening all along. Dr. Cole exhaled softly and reached for the phone mounted on the wall. The movement snapped me back into the present with a jolt of panic. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice suddenly too loud, too sharp. He paused, his hand still hovering near the receiver. "I'm required to report this," he said calmly. "Given the pattern of injuries and the nature of the findings, I need to involve emergency services." The word report sent a cold wave through me. My mind raced ahead, leaping to consequences I wasn't ready to face. Police, questions. My family, Brooke. "No," I said immediately, shaking my head despite the pain it caused. "You don't need to do that. This is a misunderstanding." The old reflex kicked in fast and strong, years of conditioning surging forward to protect the familiar order of things. "It was an accident," I insisted, my voice thinning. "Both times. My sister, she didn't mean to hurt me. She just jokes too hard sometimes." Saying it out loud felt wrong, even as I said it, like reciting a script that no longer fit the scene. Dr. Cole turned fully toward me then, his expression firm but not unkind. "Lauren," he said, carefully enunciating each word, "this isn't about intent. It's about injury. And it's about your safety." He picked up the phone, his movements unhurried but decisive. I understand this is frightening, but I can't ignore what I'm seeing. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to reach out, to stop him, to pull everything back into the familiar realm of excuses and explanations. Instead, I sat frozen as he dialed. "This is Dr. Andrew Cole at UW Health Hospital," he said into the receiver. "I have a patient with a current cranial fracture and evidence of prior healed fractures, inconsistent with the reported mechanism of injury." Yes. Adult patient. Female. Each word felt like a nail, sealing something shut. He listened for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you. We'll wait." When he hung up, the room was impossibly quiet. I stared at my hands, noticing how they trembled, how my fingers curled inward as if trying to make themselves smaller. "I didn't ask for this," I whispered, the admission slipping out before I could stop it. Dr. Cole softened slightly, pulling his stool closer. "I know," he said, "but that doesn't mean you don't deserve help." The simplicity of that statement undid me more than any medical term could have. Tears blurred my vision. Hot and sudden, spilling over despite my efforts to hold them back. I had spent my life believing that asking for help was a kind of failure, that enduring quietly was the price of belonging. Sitting there, confronted with undeniable proof, that belief finally collapsed under its own weight. My phone buzzed on the chair beside me. A message from my mother. "Did you get home okay?" Another from Brooke, sent minutes later. "You scared everyone last night. Try not to be so dramatic." The timing felt cruel, almost scripted. I turned the phone face down, my chest tightening as I realized how perfectly their words lined up with the fear still clawing at me. For years, those messages would have been enough to pull me back into silence. Now, they just made the truth clearer. Dr. Cole stood and adjusted the curtain, leaving the door slightly open. "Someone from emergency services will be here shortly," he said. "In the meantime, I want you to focus on breathing, okay? You're safe here." Safe. The word landed differently this time. Not as an abstract idea, but as a physical reality, a locked door, trained professionals, a system that didn't care about family politics or hurt feelings. A system that responded to fractures, not excuses. As I waited, fear and relief tangled together in my chest. I felt the world I'd known begin to rearrange itself. The story I'd been told my entire life, that I was accident-prone, overly sensitive, the problem was unraveling thread by thread. In its place, a new, terrifying, undeniable truth was emerging. The injuries in my body were not isolated incidents. They were a record. A timeline, proof. For the first time since the night before, since childhood, really, a single, steady thought cut through the noise and settled into something like certainty. I'm not imagining this. I had never been imagining it. And whatever came next, whatever questions were asked, whatever doors opened or closed, I knew one thing with absolute clarity: the world had shifted. The evidence had spoken. And I was done arguing with my own pain. I was still staring at the blank wall across from the bed when there was a soft knock at the open door, the kind meant to announce presence without intrusion. I looked up instinctively, bracing myself for another doctor, another nurse, another explanation I might not be ready to hear. Instead, a woman stepped into the room with an unhurried confidence that immediately changed the air. She was in plain clothes, dark blazer, badge clipped discreetly at her waist, her posture relaxed but alert. "Lauren Mitchell?" she asked gently, as if confirming my name mattered. When I nodded, she offered a small, reassuring smile. "I'm Detective Maya Rodriguez. I know this isn't how you expected your day to go. Do you feel okay talking for a few minutes?" The way she asked not "can you," but "do you feel okay" caught me off guard. I hesitated, then nodded again, my throat tight. She pulled a chair close and sat at eye level with me, not looming, not distant, her attention steady and grounded. "I'm here because the medical team has concerns about your injuries," she said calmly. "My job is to understand what happened and to make sure you're safe." The word safe echoed again, unfamiliar but oddly stabilizing. I folded my hands together to keep them from shaking and waited for the questions to start, the interrogation I had imagined for years whenever I pictured police involvement. Instead, she began simply. "Can you tell me, in your own words, what brought you to the hospital today?" I started with last night, the graduation dinner, the cake, the fall. I described it carefully, sticking to facts, my voice measured, as if precision might protect me from judgment. Detective Rodriguez listened without interruption, occasionally nodding, her pen moving lightly across a small notebook. When I finished, she looked up. "And before last night," she asked, "have you ever had injuries that required medical attention?" The question opened a door I had spent decades keeping shut. Images flickered through my mind: the pool, the stairs, the slammed door, each one rising with uncomfortable clarity now that someone was finally asking. "I've been hurt before," I said slowly. "But I didn't always go to the doctor." She didn't react, didn't press, just waited. The silence stretched, giving me space to continue. "There were accidents," I added. Even as I said the word, it felt inadequate, thin. "Accidents," she repeated neutrally. "Who was usually with you when those happened?" The answer surfaced immediately, undeniable now that the question had been asked. "My sister," I said. Saying it out loud sent a strange shiver through me. Brooke's face appeared in my mind, with startling clarity, her hands, her voice, her insistence. Detective Rodriguez's pen paused for a fraction of a second before moving again. "Was she present most of the time?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes, almost always." She leaned back slightly, considering. "After those incidents," she continued, "did you seek medical care?" I shook my head. "Not usually." The admission felt heavier than expected. "Why not?" she asked, not accusatory, just curious. I swallowed. "Because it didn't seem necessary," I said automatically, then hesitated. The rehearsed answer no longer satisfied me. "And because I was told not to." Her eyes lifted from the page, meeting mine fully now. "Told not to?" she repeated gently. I took a breath, my chest tightening as the words lined up in my mind. "My sister would say it wasn't a big deal," I said. "That going to the doctor would just cause trouble. She'd tell me I was overreacting. That I'd get everyone worked up over nothing." The memories came faster now, spilling over once the dam had cracked. Sometimes my mom would say the same thing. That I bruise easily. That I'm sensitive. I felt a strange heat rise behind my eyes, not quite tears, not yet. Detective Rodriguez nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "Lauren," she said, her voice steady. "I need to ask you something very important." She paused, giving the question weight before she spoke it aloud. "Has anyone ever explicitly told you not to see a doctor after you were hurt?" The words landed with a force that stole my breath. Explicitly, not implied. Not suggested, told. The room seemed to hold its breath with me as I searched my memory, suddenly aware of how carefully I had avoided framing things this way before. I saw Brooke sitting on the edge of my bed years ago, pressing an ice pack against my ribs, her voice low and persuasive. "You don't need a doctor for this. They'll just make a big deal out of it." I heard my mother sigh. "Hospitals are expensive." "You're fine." "Yes," I whispered. The answer felt irreversible. "Yes." More than once. Days on. Detective Rodriguez wrote something down, then closed her notebook and set it aside. "Thank you for telling me that," she said quietly. "I know that's not easy." The room felt different now, charged in a way it hadn't been before. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't clumsiness or bad luck. The pattern was taking shape, clear and unmistakable. And I could see it reflected in her calm focus. She asked more questions after that, methodical but compassionate. When the first injury I could remember had happened, whether alcohol had been involved last night, if anyone else had witnessed prior incidents. With each answer, the story grew less fragmented, the pieces aligning into something coherent and disturbing. I found myself correcting my own language as I spoke, catching when I tried to minimize, choosing instead to describe what actually happened. "She pushed me," I said at one point, the words tasting strange and sharp. Detective Rodriguez didn't flinch. She didn't question my phrasing. She wrote it down. At some point, she asked if my family knew where I was. The question sent a ripple of anxiety through me. "They know I left the restaurant," I said. "They don't know I'm here." She nodded. "That's okay," she said. "You're not required to inform anyone right now." The relief I felt at that permission surprised me. I hadn't realized how deeply ingrained the expectation to explain myself had become. When she finally stood, signaling the end of the initial interview, she met my eyes again. "Lauren," she said, "based on what you've told me and what the medical team has documented, we're treating this as a case of ongoing harm." The phrase sent a chill through me, not because it sounded exaggerated, but because it sounded accurate. That means we're going to look into this further. We'll gather statements, review any available evidence, and take steps to ensure your safety. Safety. There it was again, no longer abstract, but procedural. Real, I nodded. My mind reeling, my body exhausted. As she moved toward the door, she paused. "One more thing," she said. "What you're experiencing right now, this confusion, this doubt that's very common in situations like this. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you've been carrying this alone for a long time." Exited. After she left, I lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling tiles as if they might rearrange themselves into something familiar. My phone buzzed again on the chair beside me, but I didn't look at it. For the first time, I didn't feel compelled to explain, to smooth things over, to preemptively apologize. The conversation replayed in my head, not as an interrogation, but as a translation. Detective Rodriguez had taken the scattered, half-formed truths I'd lived with and named them plainly, without judgment. I wasn't accident-prone. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't imagining patterns where none existed. There was language for what had happened to me, and, for the first time, I was using it. As the pain in my head throbbed steadily, grounding me in my body, a strange clarity settled in alongside the fear. Telling the truth hadn't shattered me. It had steadied me. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion, a new realization took hold, quiet but powerful. This was the beginning of a different story, one where my voice mattered, and where the truth, once named, could no longer be taken back. I didn't hear them arrive so much as I felt the shift in the room before the door even opened, the way air changes when something familiar and heavy pushes into it. Voices carried down the hallway, my mother's sharp, urgent cadence, my father's lower, clipped replies, and my chest tightened in recognition. By the time the curtain was pulled back, they were already inside, my mother first, eyes scanning me from head to toe as if inventorying damage, my father close behind her, jaw set, shoulders rigid. "Lauren," my mother said, relief and irritation colliding in the same breath. "What is going on? We've been calling you." She didn't wait for an answer. "This is ridiculous. You scared everyone half to death." I pushed myself a little more upright, every movement deliberate. The headache pulsed, steady and unforgiving, but it grounded me in a way I hadn't expected. "I'm at the hospital," I said simply. My mother waved a hand, dismissive. "Yes, we know that now. But why? They told us you hit your head. That happens. People fall. You had a long night, a lot of emotions. Graduation is stressful." She glanced around the room, as if searching for an audience that might validate her tone. "Where is the doctor?" My father, Robert, cleared his throat. "Lauren," he said, softer but no less firm. "Your mom's right. Let's not blow this out of proportion." He shifted his weight, uncomfortable, his eyes flicking briefly to the monitors before returning to my face. "We all saw what happened. It was a joke. Brooke didn't mean anything by it. It's over." The words landed with a familiarity that once would have flattened me. Stress. Emotions. A joke. I felt the old reflex stir the urge to nod, to apologize, to smooth the edges before anyone got upset. Instead, I took a slow breath and felt the ache in my skull answer back, sharp and present. "A joke," I repeated. My mother seized on it immediately. "Exactly. Sisters tease each other. You've always been a little sensitive about things like this." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "If you told someone something else, you need to fix it. Right now." My stomach tightened. "Fix what?" I asked. "What you said," she snapped. "We were told there's some kind of report. That you implied something inappropriate." Her eyes hardened, accusation flaring. "Lauren, you don't understand what you're doing. This could cause serious trouble." "There's already trouble," I said quietly. My father sighed, rubbing his temple. Lauren, listen to yourself. You've had a headache before. You've been under pressure for months. Finishing your degree, working all the time. Stress can do strange things to the body. He gestured vaguely. And alcohol. There was wine. Champagne. That can make accidents look worse than they are. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something settle in my chest. This was the same script, delivered with different emphasis. There was always an external explanation ready, something to blame that wasn't Brooke. The doctor found fractures, I said. My mother scoffed. Fractures? Please. You bruise easily. You always have. You probably hurt yourself before and forgot. I felt heat rise in my face, not embarrassment this time, but anger, clean and focused. They're not guessing, I said. They're on the scans. My mother's expression flickered, uncertainty flashing through before resolve snapped back into place. Lauren, she said sharply, you are confused. That happens when you panic. You need to tell them that. She glanced toward the door, lowering her voice again. We can't let this turn into something it isn't. Something in me shifted then, subtle but decisive. I thought of Detective Rodriguez, sitting at eye level with me, asking questions without judgment. I thought of Dr. Cole's steady voice, the images on the screen, the way my own bones had told a story I'd been taught to doubt. I realized, with startling clarity, that this moment wasn't new. It was just louder. This was the same crossroads I'd stood at my entire life, the same choice dressed up with higher stakes. And, for the first time, I didn't feel pulled backward by habit. I'm not confused, I said. My voice didn't shake. My mother froze, her mouth opening slightly as if she hadn't heard me correctly. I met her gaze and continued, each word deliberate. I'm finally awake. The silence that followed felt electric. My father stared at me, stunned, as if I'd spoken in a language he didn't recognize. My mother recovered first. Lauren, don't be dramatic, she said, the edge creeping back into her tone. You don't know what you're saying. I do, I said. I know exactly what I'm saying. The headache flared again, but I welcomed it, proof that my body was still very much involved in this conversation. I've been hurt before. More than once. And I was told not to get help. That's not confusion. That's a pattern. My mother laughed, sharp and humorless. This is absurd, she said. You're accusing your own sister over a silly mistake? I'm telling the truth, I replied. The words felt solid, grounding. Whether you like it or not. My father took a step forward, his voice dropping. Lauren, think about what you're doing. About Brooke. About the family. I did think about Brooke. Her laughter, her hands, the way she'd always been there after, soothing and convincing, shaping the narrative before I could speak. I thought about the nights I'd lain awake telling myself it was nothing, that I was lucky to have a family that cared at all. And I thought about the evidence etched into my own skull. I am thinking about the family, I said. I'm thinking about me too. Before either of them could respond, the curtain shifted again. Detective Rodriguez stepped back into the room, her presence calm but authoritative. She took in the scene in a single glance, the tension, the proximity, my parents' rigid postures. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, she said evenly. I'm going to need to ask you to step outside for a moment. My mother bristled. Excuse me? This is our daughter. Yes, Detective Rodriguez replied. And she's also my interview subject. I need to speak with her privately. Our dumb times, it's spickstum. My mother looked at me, betrayal etched across her face. Lauren, she said, voice tight. Tell her this is a misunderstanding. I held her gaze, feeling the old fear flicker and fade. It's not, I said. For a moment, I thought she might argue, might raise her voice, might try to overpower the situation the way she always had. Instead, she huffed and turned away, grabbing my father's arm. Fine, she snapped. But this isn't over. They left in a rush of indignation, the curtain falling back into place behind them with a soft swish that sounded like punctuation. The room felt lighter immediately, as if something heavy had been removed. Detective Rodriguez looked at me with quiet approval. Are you okay? She asked. I nodded, surprised to find that it was true. My heart was racing, my head still ached, but there was a steadiness beneath it all that hadn't been there before. Yes, I said. I am. Is something, endeavored. She pulled the chair closer again. Thank you for standing your ground, she said. That's not easy, especially with family pressure. I exhaled slowly, the tension draining from my shoulders in increments. For the first time, I noticed how tired I was, not the bone-deep exhaustion I'd lived with for years, but the clean fatigue that comes after making a hard, necessary choice. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't accused. I hadn't backed down. As Detective Rodriguez reviewed next steps, explaining what would happen and what support was available, I listened carefully, absorbing the information without the usual fog of self-doubt. Somewhere in the midst of it, a simple truth settled into place, calm and undeniable. I wasn't retreating anymore. I wasn't minimizing or smoothing or apologizing my way out of discomfort. I had faced my family and told them the truth. And even as the consequences loomed, even as fear lingered at the edges, I felt something new take root beneath it all. Resolve. The kind that doesn't need permission to exist. The quiet after my parents left didn't last long. It never did. The ER had a way of filling silence with footsteps, with murmured conversations just out of reach, with a low hum of machines reminding you that life continued whether you were ready or not. Detective Rodriguez had just finished explaining the next steps, who would be contacted, what would happen over the next few days, when there was another knock at the door. This one was softer, hesitant, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure they were welcome. Detective Rodriguez glanced toward the doorway, then back at me. "Lauren," she said, "there's a woman here asking to speak with you. She says she's your aunt, Carol Mitchell." My chest tightened. Aunt Carol. My mother's younger sister. The quiet one. The one who lived a few towns over and showed up to holidays with homemade desserts and left early, always claiming a headache or an early morning. I hadn't spoken to her much in recent years, not out of anger, but distance. She was family, but not central. Not loud enough to matter, I'd always assumed. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "She can come in." Carol stepped inside, as if the room might reject her. She was smaller than I remembered, her shoulders slightly hunched, her hands clasped tightly together. Her eyes went immediately to the bandage at my temple, then away again, as if the sight hurt her. "Lauren," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." She moved closer, but stopped short of touching me, unsure of her place. Detective Rodriguez pulled another chair into the room and gestured for her to sit. Carol took a breath, visibly steadying herself. "I heard what happened," she said, looking at the detective. "And I need to say something." Her gaze flicked to me, apologetic, then back to the floor. "I should have said it years ago." The words settled heavily in the air. Detective Rodriguez leaned forward slightly. "Take your time," she said gently. "What would you like to share?" Carol swallowed hard. "I've seen Brooke hurt Lauren before." My heart skipped, a sharp, painful jolt. Carol continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "When the girls were little, there were moments that didn't sit right with me. I told myself it was roughhousing. Kids being kids." She shook her head slowly. "But it wasn't always that." I felt my breath shallow as she spoke, memories aligning with hers in unsettling clarity. "There was a summer barbecue," Carol said. "Lauren must have been 8, maybe 9. Brooke was right behind her near the patio steps. I saw Brooke put both hands on Lauren's back and shove her. She closed her eyes briefly. Lauren fell hard. Everyone thought she tripped. Brooke started crying immediately, screaming for help. Your mother rushed to her." Carol looked up at me then, her eyes glossy. I remember thinking, she didn't even look surprised. "Brooke, I mean..." She looked satisfied. Just for a second. A strange numbness spread through me, followed by something like vindication. I wasn't imagining it. Someone else had seen it. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked quietly. The question wasn't accusatory, it was genuine. Carol's shoulders sagged. "I was scared," she admitted. "Your mother, she doesn't take kindly to accusations. Especially about Brooke." And every time I thought about bringing it up, there was another explanation ready. Another reason not to rock the boat. Her voice cracked. I told myself it wasn't my place. Detective Rodriguez nodded slowly, jotting down notes. Have there been other instances? She asked. Carol hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Not always directly. But I heard things. She wrung her hands together, the movement nervous and familiar. A few years ago, after your grandmother passed, I was at the house helping clean up. Brooke was on the phone in the kitchen. She didn't know I was in the hallway. Carol took a breath. She was angry. About the house. About how things were being handled. And she said, Carol's voice dropped to a whisper, accidents are useful. The words sent a chill down my spine. They landed with a weight that eclipsed everything else. I remembered the falls, the slammed doors, the carefully orchestrated concern afterward. Useful. As if pain were a tool. As if my injuries had served a purpose I'd never been allowed to see. Detective Rodriguez looked up sharply. Did she say anything else? She asked. She said Lauren was always in the way, Carol replied, her voice steadier now, fueled by resolve. That if Lauren were less competent, people would stop expecting so much of her. That Carol stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth. That she deserved what she got for being difficult. I felt something inside me give way, not collapse, but release. Years of self-doubt, of wondering if I'd somehow invited harm by existing wrong, loosened their grip. Brooke's words, filtered through Carol's shaken confession, reframed everything. This wasn't sibling rivalry. This wasn't carelessness. It was intent. Carol turned fully toward me then, tears finally spilling over. I should have protected you, she said. I should have spoken up. I'm so sorry I didn't. I reached out without thinking, my hand finding hers. She squeezed back, her grip surprisingly strong. You're here now, I said softly. That matters. And I meant it. Her voice, shaky as it was, added something crucial to the truth that was unfolding. It wasn't just my word anymore. It wasn't just my body's testimony etched into bone. It was corroboration, witness. Detective Rodriguez closed her notebook and met Carol's gaze. Thank you, she said sincerely. What you've shared is important. It helps establish context and pattern. She turned to me. Lauren, having someone else confirm what you experienced changes how this will proceed. I nodded, overwhelmed but steady. The fear that had dominated the earlier hours was still there, but it no longer stood alone. It was joined by clarity, by validation, by the quiet power of being believed. After Carol left, promising to stay reachable, the room felt different again. Fuller, somehow. I lay back against the pillows, exhaustion finally settling into my bones. For years, I had carried the weight of these memories alone, convinced that silence was the price of peace. Now, the silence had broken, not with shouting or spectacle, but with truth spoken plainly by someone who had seen, heard, and remembered. I wasn't the only one who knew anymore. And that changed everything. The decision wasn't presented to me as a question. Detective Rodriguez explained it calmly, methodically, as if laying out the steps of a process that had already gathered too much momentum to be stopped by anyone's discomfort. Based on the medical findings, your statement, and your aunt's testimony, she said, we're moving forward. She paused, watching my face carefully. We believe the safest and clearest course is to arrest Brooke at your parents' house. The words settled slowly, each one landing with a weight I felt deep in my chest. At their house? I asked. Part of me already understood the answer, but hearing it confirmed made my stomach tighten. Detective Rodriguez nodded. There are witnesses there. Family members. It ensures transparency, and it prevents the narrative from being controlled afterward. She didn't say Brooke's name again, but it hung between us anyway, sharp and unmistakable. Sunday evening arrived with an unsettling calm. I hadn't slept much since leaving the hospital, though the pain medication dulled the worst edges of the headache. Carol insisted on driving me, her presence quiet and steady beside me as we pulled into my parents' driveway. Cars lined the street, my cousins, my grandparents, family, friends who had come for what they thought was a routine dinner, maybe a belated graduation celebration. The house glowed warmly from the inside, lights spilling through the windows, laughter drifting faintly into the cool air. It looked exactly as it always had. Normal, safe. That normalcy felt almost cruel now, knowing what was about to fracture it beyond repair. Inside, the living room buzzed with conversation. My mother stood near the kitchen, already mid-performance, smiling too brightly as she poured drinks. My father hovered nearby, tense but silent. And Brooke was everywhere. She laughed loudly from the couch, hair perfectly styled, her confidence unshaken, as if the past days had been nothing more than an inconvenience. When she saw me, her smile sharpened. "Look who decided to join us," she said lightly. "Feeling better?" There was something in her eyes then, something cold and assessing. Like she was taking inventory of what I knew. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I moved to stand beside Carol, my pulse quickening but my spine straight. For the first time, I wasn't here to appease or explain. I was here to witness. The knock at the door cut cleanly through the noise. It was firm, unmistakable. Conversation faltered. My mother frowned, confused, and my father stiffened as he went to answer it. When he opened the door and saw the officers standing there, something drained from his face so quickly it startled me. Detective Rodriguez stepped forward, composed and clear. "Good evening," she said. "We're here for Brooke Mitchell." The room erupted. My mother let out a sharp cry. "What is this?" she demanded. "This is outrageous." Brooke laughed, a brittle sound that rang hollow. "You've got to be kidding," she said, looking around for confirmation that this was some kind of mistake. "What's this about? A stupid cake?" Detective Rodriguez didn't flinch. "Brooke Mitchell," she repeated, her voice steady. "You are under arrest for assault resulting in serious bodily injury, as well as evidence indicating a pattern of ongoing harm." She gestured slightly, and the officers stepped forward. "That's insane," Brooke snapped, her composure cracking at the edges. "She's exaggerating. She always does." She turned toward my mother, her voice rising. Tell them she's confused." But my mother didn't move. She stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing without sound, as if the words she'd relied on for years had finally abandoned her. My father looked from Brooke to me, then away, his jaw clenched tight. As the officers approached, Brooke's laughter dissolved completely, replaced by something raw and feral. "You think you've won?" she spat, her gaze locking onto mine with startling intensity. "You think this makes you special?" The room fell silent, every eye trained on her now. "You've always been in my way," she continued, the words spilling out with a venom I'd never heard so openly before. "Everyone always praised you for being strong, for being responsible. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to watch someone like you be admired just for surviving?" The officers moved closer, one reaching for her arm. Brooke yanked it away, her voice rising to a near shout. "I wanted you gone," she said, the confession sharp and unmistakable. "I wanted you to disappear so people would finally see me without you standing there like some silent accusation." My mother gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. Someone in the back whispered my name. Brooke laughed again, hysterical now. "Accidents happen," she sneered. "And sometimes accidents are useful." The words echoed through the room, landing with a collective, horrified understanding. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't look away. I met her gaze steadily, no longer shrinking from what I saw there. "That's enough," one of the officers said firmly as he took hold of her arm. Brooke struggled briefly, then stilled, her breathing ragged. As the cuffs clicked into place around her wrists, a sound escaped her that I'd never heard before, not laughter, not anger, but fear. Real, unfiltered fear. My mother took a step forward, shaking. "Brooke," she whispered. "Oh God." But Brooke didn't look at her. She looked at me, her expression twisted with rage and something else, defeat, maybe, or the shock of being seen too clearly at last. "You ruined everything," she hissed. I shook my head slowly, the movement careful but deliberate. "You did," I said quietly. And for once, the truth didn't need defending. As Brooke was led toward the door, the room remained frozen, disbelief etched onto every familiar face. No one laughed. No one minimized. No one called it a joke. The narrative my family had protected for decades collapsed under the weight of undeniable reality. When the door closed behind the officers, the silence that followed was deafening. My mother sank into a chair, her carefully constructed certainty shattered. My father stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped. Around them, relatives exchanged stunned glances, whispers rippling through the room as understanding settled in. This wasn't an overreaction. This wasn't stress or alcohol or sibling rivalry. This was violence, named and exposed. I stood there, breathing steadily, my head still aching, but my mind clearer than it had ever been. The truth was no longer mine to carry alone. It had been spoken aloud, witnessed, acted upon. Whatever came next, courtrooms, consequences, uncomfortable reckonings, one thing was certain. My family could no longer deny what they had seen with their own eyes. And neither could I. The days that followed moved in a strange, uneven rhythm, as if time itself was unsure how to behave now that the truth had been dragged into the open. There were phone calls I didn't answer, messages I didn't read right away. Long stretches of silence broken by moments of sudden urgency. Detective Rodriguez stayed in contact, her updates steady and factual, anchoring me when my thoughts threatened to spiral. Brooke was charged formally within 48 hours. The language of the documents was clinical and precise, stripped of emotion in a way that felt both jarring and necessary. Assault resulting in bodily injury. Pattern of ongoing harm. Seeing those words in print was surreal. They described the same events my family had laughed off for years, now reframed without euphemism, without apology. Brooke's attorney pushed for a swift resolution. The evidence was too solid to ignore. The medical imaging, the witness statements. Carol's testimony, the security footage from the restaurant that showed Brooke angling the cake, the force of the shove, the pause before her performance of concern. There were no grand courtroom theatrics, no dramatic confessions delivered under hot lights. Justice, I learned, often arrived quietly. Brooke accepted a plea agreement. Supervised probation. Mandatory long-term therapy focused on violent behavior and impulse control. A strict no-contact order that prohibited her from coming anywhere near me, directly or indirectly. When Detective Rodriguez explained it, she watched my face carefully, as if gauging whether I'd feel disappointed by the lack of spectacle. I didn't. What I felt was relief, heavy and grounding. The system had done what my family never had. It had drawn a line and enforced it. My mother did not attend the hearing. When I heard that, a small, old part of me felt the familiar sting of abandonment, but it passed more quickly than I expected. Diane had unraveled in the weeks after the arrest, her confidence collapsing inward as the narrative she'd clung to for decades disintegrated. She called me once, late at night, her voice thin and unfamiliar. "I don't understand how this happened," she said, as if Brooke's behavior had materialized out of nowhere, unrelated to years of indulgence and denial. I didn't argue with her. I didn't explain. I simply said, "I'm focusing on my recovery." The line went quiet after that. When we eventually spoke again, she told me she'd started therapy. Not for Brooke, she emphasized, but for herself. I took that information in without comment. Healing, I was learning, was not something I could supervise for other people. My father faded into the background almost completely. Robert had always been a quiet presence, his silence mistaken for neutrality, his avoidance disguised as calm. Now, that silence became his defining feature. He didn't defend Brooke anymore. He didn't challenge the facts. He simply stopped engaging. When I saw him briefly at a family gathering weeks later, he hugged me awkwardly and said nothing at all about what had happened. There was no apology, no acknowledgement, but there was also no denial. The absence of excuses felt like its own kind of reckoning. The family dynamic shifted permanently. Without Brooke's laughter filling every space, the house felt hollow, stripped of the tension we'd all mistaken for energy. There were no more jokes at my expense, no teasing stories retold for entertainment. Conversations were careful, subdued, as if everyone was suddenly aware of how fragile the illusion of normalcy had been. Some relatives reached out privately, offering hesitant apologies for not noticing, for not intervening. Others kept their distance, unsure how to interact now that the rules had changed. I didn't chase either response. For the first time, I wasn't responsible for managing other people's comfort. The no-contact order became a kind of invisible shield. Knowing Brooke couldn't call, couldn't show up unannounced, couldn't insert herself into my life, brought a level of peace I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I still thought about her sometimes, especially at night, when my mind wandered into old habits. But the fear that had once accompanied those thoughts was gone. She no longer occupied the same psychological space. She was a problem the law had contained, not a force I had to anticipate and manage. Physically, recovery was slow but steady. The fracture healed. The headaches faded. With each follow-up appointment, Dr. Cole reminded me that my symptoms were consistent with trauma, both recent and cumulative. Be patient with yourself, he told me. Your body has been holding on to more than you realized. I took his advice seriously. I rested when I needed to. I stopped pushing through pain just to prove I could. That, more than anything, felt like rebellion. Emotionally, the shift was more complex. There were moments of grief that caught me off guard, grief for the sister I thought I had, for the family I'd believed in, for the version of myself who'd learned to endure instead of protest. But beneath that grief was something steadier, something stronger. Clarity. I no longer questioned my memory. I no longer replayed events searching for ways to absolve others at my own expense. The truth had been spoken aloud, documented, acted upon. It no longer lived solely in my body. One afternoon, weeks after the case was finalized, I sat alone in my apartment, sunlight spilling across the floor, and realized something that stopped me cold. I wasn't bracing for anything. Not a phone call. Not a confrontation. Not a joke that might turn cruel without warning. The constant vigilance I'd carried for as long as I could remember had gone quiet. In its absence, there was space unfamiliar, almost unsettling at first, but undeniably peaceful. Justice hadn't come in the form of punishment alone. It had come in boundaries. In recognition, in the simple fact that what happened to me had been named correctly. Brooke's probation, her therapy, the court's restrictions, those were consequences. Necessary ones. But the deeper justice was internal. I was no longer complicit in my own erasure. I didn't minimize. I didn't excuse. I didn't laugh things off to keep the peace. In my family, the phrase "it was just a joke" disappeared entirely. No one dared use it anymore. The words had lost their power, exposed for what they had always been: a cover for harm, a demand for silence. And in that quiet, stripped-down aftermath, I began to understand something fundamental. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't always look like victory. Sometimes, it looked like the end of pretending. 14 months after the night my sister was let out of my parents' house in handcuffs, I stood on a rain-darkened sidewalk in Portland, Oregon, holding a cardboard box against my chest and breathing in air that smelled like wet leaves and coffee. The city felt softer than Madison had, quieter in a way that didn't ask questions. I had come here with 2 suitcases, a few pieces of furniture I refused to part with, and a nervous hope that distance might finally allow me to hear my own thoughts without interruption. Moving wasn't an act of escape so much as an act of alignment. For the first time, my outer life matched an inner decision I had already made. I was choosing myself without apology. The apartment was small, flooded with gray light most mornings, but it felt honest. No echoes of old expectations. No rooms heavy with unspoken rules. In the early weeks, I woke up disoriented, bracing for a familiar tension that never came. My body was still learning what safety felt like. Healing, I discovered, wasn't linear or dramatic. It happened in subtle recalibrations: sleep that came more easily, shoulders that no longer lived inches below my ears, the absence of dread when my phone buzzed. The no-contact order remained in place, but I barely thought about it anymore. Brooke existed somewhere outside my daily life, contained by boundaries that no longer required my vigilance. Work became my anchor. Through a community referral, I joined a nonprofit that supported survivors of domestic and family violence, first in an administrative role, then gradually in direct advocacy. I listened more than I spoke at first, absorbing stories that carried different details but a painfully familiar rhythm: minimization, denial, the slow erosion of self-trust. Sitting across from women who apologized for their bruises, for their fear, for needing help at all, something inside me settled into clarity. I knew this terrain. I knew how silence could masquerade as strength. And I knew, now, what it took to step out of it. There was a moment during a group session 6 months into my work when a woman across the circle said, "I keep thinking it's my fault because if I were stronger, this wouldn't hurt so much." The room went quiet, the weight of her words pressing down on all of us. I felt my heart beat steadily in my chest and realized I no longer felt compelled to correct her gently or deflect the pain with platitudes. "Strength doesn't cancel harm," I said simply. Heads lifted. Eyes met mine. In that moment, I understood that my story wasn't something I was running from anymore. It was something I was carrying with intention. The Clear Boundaries project began as a small idea scribbled in a notebook late one night. I wanted to create a space focused not just on survival, but on the concept that had changed everything for me: boundaries. Not as ultimatums or punishments, but as acts of self-respect. The first meeting took place in a borrowed room at a local community center, mismatched chairs arranged in a loose circle. 12 people showed up. Some spoke. Some cried. Some sat silently, absorbing the idea that they were allowed to draw lines without justification. We met again the following week. And the week after that. By the time a year had passed, Clear Boundaries had a name, a modest website, and a growing list of participants. We talked about practical things, safety planning, legal options, communication, but we also talked about grief. About the loss of the family we thought we had. About the discomfort of being labeled difficult or selfish when we stopped cooperating with harm. Over and over, I watched people straighten in their seats when they realized they weren't broken for needing limits. They were human. My relationship with my parents remained distant and carefully contained. My mother sent occasional updates, therapy appointments, reflections she didn't ask me to respond to. My father stayed mostly silent, his presence reduced to holiday cards and brief messages that said little but didn't deny the past anymore. I no longer waited for apologies that might never come. Closure, I learned, was not something other people handed to you. It was something you built through consistency and choice. There were still days when memories surfaced unexpectedly. A laugh that sounded too sharp. A hand on my shoulder that lingered a moment too long. But those moments no longer unraveled me. I had language now, I had community. And most importantly, I had boundaries that held. I could say no without explanation. I could leave a room without guilt. I could trust the quiet signals of my body without immediately arguing them away. One evening, after a particularly full support session, I walked home through a light drizzle, the city humming softly around me. I thought about the version of myself who had apologized while bleeding, frosting, and blood onto a restaurant floor. I thought about how desperately she'd wanted anyone to notice that something was wrong. And I realized that I was finally that person for myself. Not hardened. Not bitter. Awake. If there is one truth I carry with me now, it is this: family is not the place where you must bleed in order to be loved. Love does not require endurance of harm. It does not demand silence. And boundaries, real ones, are not acts of betrayal, they are acts of self-respect. They are the line where survival turns into living. To anyone listening to this who recognizes pieces of themselves in my story, I want you to know something important. Doubting your pain does not make it less real. Needing distance does not make you cruel. And choosing yourself does not make you ungrateful. It makes you honest. If you're watching this and you've carried a wound like mine, quiet, minimized, dismissed, I invite you to share your story in the comments. Not because you owe anyone an explanation, but because speaking breaks isolation. And if you're not ready to share yet, that's okay too. Just know this: you are not alone. There is a life beyond enduring. There is a version of you that gets to feel safe. And you are allowed, at any moment, to begin walking toward it.